What you should be seeing on the screen is the village of Dasht. If I can take you back to an August night in 2002, if you can join me in this village of Dasht, I want to take you to this summer night in August. It's a quiet night. It's a night where the only illumination is the stars. And the only sounds in this village are the sound of the river quietly murmuring by and the wind through the trees. In the middle of this night, the animals in the village of Dasht begin to stir. The cows begin to low. The dogs begin to whine and scratch at the doors of their masters. Birds take flight. This cacophony of noise, this feeling of uncertainty translates to the community. People begin to rise. People begin to check what's happening. Call on their neighbors. Try to find out what is going on. What is causing this disturbance? As they're trying to find out what's going on, as they're putting on their clothes and checking outside, they feel the first stirrings of a tremor. The village of Dasht, which is 15 kilometers away from here, surrounded by the mountains that we are here, is no stranger to seismic activity. Earthquakes happen here in Badakhshan on a regular basis. At first they thought it was an earthquake, and they thought they knew what to do if an earthquake were to hit. But it wasn't an earthquake. Shortly after those first tremors, a wall of mud came descending on the village. This wall destroyed the village. It took a number of lives. It damaged a number of homes and left almost 500 people without access to homes or shelter. I had the opportunity to come to the village as part of the AKDN's emergency management arm at the time, which was FOCUS and which is now part of the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat. We worked with this community. We tried to understand how to understand where this issue came from, where this risk was, how we could avoid it for future villages, for future communities, how we could take advantage of this as a learning opportunity for all the people of Tajikistan and the region, because these high mountains are consistent across the board. In the Dasht context, we lost 24 lives. We had 15 casualties. We had 500 individuals who were displaced. We had a number of homes destroyed. And it took over 5 years for the people of Dasht to find their way back to a semblance of life. Why did it take so long? What made the Dasht context different? These mountains are the home of natural hazards. They happen with regular frequency. But what is different, what made the Dasht context different, is that the severity, the intensity, and the unpredictability of the event was one that the community was not ready for. Why were they not ready if these communities have been living with these risks for generations, for centuries? That is an important question, and that's the question that we have been trying to understand with communities. What has changed? And the answer is, the way that we understand risk, the way that we understand the environment in which we live, the habitat within which we are situated, that is changing. Climate change is forcing changes on our relationship with the land, which are completely unexpected and unprecedented. Communities who have had a relationship, a long-standing relationship, captured in song, captured in poetry, handed down generation after generation. These communities can no longer live by the same premises, the same assumptions that they've made for generations. The world is changing. The world is changing. What you're seeing up here, these are two graphs from a report that the World Bank commissioned to look at the vulnerability to climate change and the adaptive capacity. What you see from these two charts is that Tajikistan, of all the countries in Central Asia and Eurasia, has the highest vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. And it also has the second least adaptive capacity to climate change. Now, adaptive capacity takes many forms. It's what communities do, it's what governments do, it's what institutions like the Aga Khan Development Network does. These all go into developing an adaptive capacity. But one of the things that we did, one of the things that the Aga Khan Agency for Habitat and the AKDN did, is we very much wanted to understand how can we develop a model which is specific to the needs of communities, specific to their understanding of how they want to take forward solutions. And so what we did after a decade and a half of dialogue, a decade and a half of trying new ideas, trying new programs, trying new interventions, is we developed a model that you see here, which is around 4 key principles. And this is the model for community resilience. The first piece is helping communities survive the disaster. The second is helping them adapt to what is a changing context. The third piece is helping them to strengthen their infrastructure, strengthen the services that enable them to take the next step to the fourth piece, which is helping them thrive, helping them really become who they choose to be. In our engagement, that understanding of how communities survive has been through establishing community emergency response teams, community stockpiles, emergency communications for communities that need to have support within hours of an emergency occurring. Those golden hours after an emergency occurs are the ones that will determine the number of people that will survive it. And us being able to go in, develop that community capacity to survive emergencies, coupled with an institutional capacity, working with the governments of the region, working with our AKDN partners, to be able to deploy very quickly when there is a large emergency and provide support to both the state and the communities. That all goes into our understanding of how we support and help communities to survive. Building on that element of survival is the concept of adaptation. Communities who once understood their context, their habitat, now need to relearn that habitat. And traditional indigenous knowledge doesn't always serve them the way it had before. The patterns are changing. The weather is changing. It's unpredictable. How do we get to a point where we understand that unpredictability a little bit better? We engage with both community knowledge and scientific knowledge. We engage geologists, hydrologists, engineers, all manners of scientific discipline to support communities in a very detailed manner, understanding where that indigenous knowledge meets with scientific knowledge. And based on that, we build hazard vulnerability risk assessments, integrated habitat assessments, hazard maps which help inform where communities should build, where they should place their houses, where they should do their farming. All of these key pieces that go into helping communities plan and understand how best to rework with their land using new knowledge, understanding what is happening with the glaciers that are above them and the glacial lakes that threaten them. Once we've supported that element of survival, once we've helped them to understand how to adapt, then we engage with strengthening their infrastructure, strengthening their services, getting them to a place where they can take that next step, where they can take that ability to survive an incident, to understand where the future can be, and then go in with water supply systems. Water supply systems that are established to reduce the impact of waterborne disease, and are established using hazard maps to ensure that they aren't destroyed during the next mud flow. We work on developing safe havens which communities can have access to during emergencies, emergency roads, emergency bridges, all sorts of infrastructure and investments, the early warning systems, things that can really bring that understanding of how to surround a habitat with hardened infrastructure and hardened services that allows them to take that next step, which is to help them thrive. One of the things that in our dialogue with communities has been very clearly articulated is that communities want access to the world. They want to be a part of what is happening all around them. They want to do that from a place of security, and they want to do that from a place that keeps in mind and leverages the access that they have to or services like healthcare, education. And we have looked at this through the lens of housing. Housing is one of the key areas that we look to engage with communities to help them take that next step towards being a part of larger society. Because when you are invested in a multi-generational asset like a home, that gives you a security to be able to work with the world that you may not have had before. How do we know that we've been successful? How can you know? Unfortunately, the only proof is when the next disaster strikes. What I'd like to walk you through is the situation that occurred in 2015 in the village of Barsem, again, a very short distance from where we are. What you're seeing here is imagery of Barsem, along with some of the video of that actual event. What made Barsem different? What made this instance different from all the others? In this particular situation, we had worked with the community. We had helped them understand how they could survive a potential threat. They had community emergency response teams. They had stockpiles of emergency goods. They had access to emergency communications. They had an understanding of their environment, so that when those first telltale signs of a potential impact began, they knew what to do. They knew they needed to evacuate communities that were at most risk. They knew they needed to take care of the people in the community that had special needs and had access issues. They knew they had to contact communities that were downstream to prepare them for what might be an emergency. And they knew they had to engage the government and the Aga Khan Development Network to be able to look at potential solutions and to be able to be prepared for a major emergency. As you can see, the impact of that emergency was significant. But what was different? What was different? In the Barsem situation, 0 lives were lost. There were no casualties. Communities knew what to do. They were prepared. There were a number of people displaced. There were a number of homes destroyed. But the time that it took that community to get back to where they were was less than a year. It was less than 6 months. Through the support of the government, they were back in homes. Through the support of the government and the AKDN, they were enabled with infrastructure. They had opportunities to take that next step, to be able to have access to better solutions in terms of water supply, in terms of roads, in terms of bridges. All of this is part of the program, and we've seen its success. We've seen how it works. The Barsem incident gave us the ability to kind of view how the impact of our engagement will continue. And one of the guiding quotations from His Highness the Aga Khan, which has really fostered and focused on how we make that link between survival to thriving, is that the visual, physical, and emotional impact of a decent home can light the spirit of human endeavor. A proper home can provide the bridge across that terrible gulf between utter poverty and the possibility of a better future. And we're here today because the solutions that we're looking at are multi-generational solutions. And they require multi-generational thinking. These are not problems that will go away with cookie-cutter ideas. That thinking has to come from the next generation and the future generations that are coming out of programs like the ones in the University of Central Asia. And we very much look forward to having you be a part of addressing this engagement and addressing this problem in a way that will bring that opportunity to thrive to these communities. Thank you. Thank you.